I'd just like to talk a little bit about the sort of mental and psychological preparation before, during, and after the 7 Ironmans and how that affected my achievements. One of the principles that I've used for many, many years is visualization. As an actor, I found it absolutely fantastic sort of rehearsal technique, and that sort of spiraled over into my teaching, my parenting, and even I feel affecting my sporting achievements. Now, I know as a sort of like a coach now and working quite heavily in triathlon and developing with athletes that psychobiological adaptation, that marrying the two together, strong body and strong mind, the whole athlete, is the way forward. We know, scientifically proven, that the mind can overcome fatigue if you so sort of train it, and that when the body says no, that the mind can take you further. So that sort of approach, that sort of mindset, is something that I considered from very, 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 very early on. Probably more important than that, the visualization side of it for me is something that I would spend many, many hours a week working on. So if you're on a static bike in the dark for 6 hours, or you're running on a treadmill for 2 hours, sometimes 3 or 4 hours, there is a lot of time to think. And you can either focus on your cadence, your pedal stroke, your position on the bike, or you can use that time to mould the mind. And it's something I would do quite a lot when I was on the bike running, or even lying in bed on a night. And to put it in a nutshell, I've spent 15 months of that training towards the 7 Ironmans, day after day, visualizing and living every single aspect of these Ironmans. And something that I figured very, very, very early on was that you can use visualization to prepare you for the worst. So in training, I would visualize every aspect of the race in the most torturous possible way that I could think of. So essentially seeing everything go wrong, not physically being up to it, having the worst conditions, having technical issues, physical issues, logistic issues, and it sounds a bit counterintuitive, but this is how I approach my 7 Ironmans, that practically and realistically not a stone was unturned and every single T was crossed and I was dotted along the way. I'm very fastidious about my preparation, but in the psychological approach to it, it was completely different. I visualized myself always, every single time, being unbelievably strong, unbelievably confident, and have the mental capacity to overcome, decipher, figure out, fix, solve anything that came my way. And I would visualize those things happening time and time and time again, never once wavering, never once caving, never once seeing it as negative, seeing it as a challenge, seeing it with a smile on my face. And I did that religiously throughout the course of my training. And that worked for me. I think some people use visualization and see themselves throwing that ball into the basket and hitting it every single time, or curling that free kick into the top right-hand corner. I think there's merit to that, but I don't think it's particularly realistic. And I have heard that there are physical adaptation to doing that. So doing things rote in your mind can have a physical adaptation, and I believe there are studies on that. For me, it was slightly different. For me, it was visualize the worst case, then everything else after that seems easy. And in most cases, that was the truth. So when we came to the 7 Ironmans, not that it was a walk in the park, because I think that would underestimate what I did, but I knew I was physically ready. I knew I was absolutely prepared for the right paces, the right nutrition, and I got those absolutely bang on. So when we got to sort of day 3, day 4, and I hadn't suffered any serious fatigue, I had no DOMs, I was getting out of bed in the morning feeling great, didn't feel hungry at any point in the day, didn't feel any drop in energy levels, was still laughing on the physio's couch at the end of day 3. I had a friend come to me and just whisper in my ear, said, "You're putting this all out on social media and you want people to pay to raise money for the charity. You need to stop saying how easy it is." And I took that as a compliment. The compliment is I'd nailed it in terms of my preparation. I was laughing through the third marathon and getting in and clicking my heels and having a pizza and then going to bed and felt great. Got up the next morning. But then by day 4, we incurred the first of the serious issues, which was a ligament in the front of my foot literally ruptured. So some sort of compartment in the front of my foot, connective tissue that goes between the foot and the shin, which flexes your foot. It just gave away and ruptured. And it looked like game over, as people would say. I couldn't lift my foot up at all. If I tried to raise my foot, it sent shooting pains up my leg. Utter agony. And this was about 20k into the 4th marathon on the Thursday. We managed to get a specialist down, a doctor, to have a look at it. So we pulled up in a pub and we had 20 or so of my support team and wider tri team stood there while this doctor did a consultation with me and said in no uncertain terms, if you continue, there is a chance that you'll cut off the blood supply to your foot, and they will have to cut open the whole front of your shin to release the pressure. Not only would it be game over, but you'd probably never run again. And my wife was sat there in tears, and I looked up and saw the stunned faces of my teammates, and fatigue had set in here. But all I remember was trying to be jovial and try and laugh about it, and I kind of, although I heard the words of him telling me how serious it was, because everything that led up to this point of just going, it doesn't matter what hits me, I will just keep going. I just turned around to the doctor and went, right, fine, I've got 20k to do, I'll see you later, and got back up and was just ready to run. And just before I went to run, he said something else. I can't remember what he said, but it triggered a different part of the conversation, and it was about running biomechanics and running style. And he'd asked me a question about my running style, and I'd mentioned rolling off my heels as a way of supporting the weak muscle in the soleus and the gastrocnemius. So basically, if you run off your toe, you fatigue and put a lot of pressure on these relatively small and weak muscles on the back of your leg. But if you roll off your heel, you don't put so much pressure on them, so I should be able to run longer, and that's how I trained. The problem was that when it came to the real thing, that rolling off the heel and the flexing of the foot, that basically had a weak tendon in that part of the foot, and that gave way. And literally in that last bit of conversation, he said, get back on your toes, start running on your toes again, which is how I'd run sprints. And I went, oh, okay. So for the previous 3.5 marathons, I'd been running off my heels, and it was utter agony. And I went back out there and I literally got on my toes and tiptoed, almost like a sprinter, tiptoed. Hey ho, presto, pain gone, completely gone, and ran the next 20k absolutely fine. And I did that for the remaining marathons. Ran on my toes. It slowed me down. I couldn't keep that pressure on my calves up, so my pace dropped massively. But I was able to continue. After the 7 Ironmans, I had quite considerable issue with that foot swelling up and the compartment syndrome sort of like setting in quite seriously in the ankle, and had to get an MRI scan. But yeah, that was probably the biggest test, physical test that I overcame. And it was almost just matter of fact. It kind of didn't matter. In my head, it was like, I'll hop if I have to, I'll crawl if I have to. I kind of knew that. It didn't matter how slow I was going to do it. As the weeks progressed, as the week progressed and we got closer to the weekend, my nutrition had been absolutely perfect. Now, if you know the Ironman, people tend to solely fuel on glucose, fructose, maltodextrin, highly refined sugars, because they can get your blood sugar up really quickly, and they can, you can digest them up to 90 grams an hour really quickly. So that's what most people fuel on. The problem there is that the breakdown of your body isn't compensated for, and the maintenance of weight isn't compensated for. So people can take in 11,000 calories a day doing an Ironman, burn off even more, and then when their body resets and the fluids reduce, they sometimes can lose 2, maybe 3 kilo in a single Ironman. So that's detrimental and something I knew couldn't happen. So I had to eat really, really quality real foods as we went through and maintain my weight and weigh myself every day. And across the space of the first 5 days, my weight fluctuated. One day it didn't go down. Generally it went down probably about 1.5 kilos, which to me was bang on, exactly what I wanted. by the time we got to the 5th day and we moved location, things started to go wrong. The weather turned. The weather was disgusting. It was the first time in the whole of the duration of the 5 previous Ironmans that I was alone. And I had to go and ride through the North Yorkshire moors on my own on a bike in the lashing rain, freezing cold, absolutely shattered. Sleep was getting less because there was a knock-on effect to having the consultation with the doctor. So time resting was less. So things started to break down on that Saturday, and that's when that psychological aspect kicked in. That loneliness, that tiredness, the fatigue. The nutrition changed because we didn't have access to some of the things that we had when we were up in the northeast, and because of that change, there was a breakdown started to occur. With 2 days to go, the breakdown started to occur, and it's probably the first time where I felt myself go, oh my God, this challenge is testing me. It's really testing me. And I put out a plea to somebody, anybody, please come and ride with me. Let me see an arse 10 metres ahead. Let me follow it. Ride beside me, tell me some jokes. And I kind of felt, it was weird, I felt that if someone didn't do that, that I could possibly fail this. The reality was I wasn't going to, but I felt it could happen. And then out of the blue, this gentleman turned up. Lovely face, very pleasant, quiet man from Darlington, smiley face, very softly spoken. Couldn't have been a more perfect person to just turn up and ride with me. Turned out he was an absolute beast on the bike as well. So to follow somebody who could pace at the pace I wanted to go to was just a godsend. And how quickly your mindset can change, how quickly that mindset can affect physicality. Because at that point, with the lashing rain and the wind and being alone, I felt empty. My legs didn't want to move, and then this gentleman turned up, and just being there changed everything. It was a different day. It felt like the weather changed. It was amazing, absolutely amazing. That was possibly the toughest thing that I went through psychologically up until that point. Towards the end of that 6th day, there was another little psychological issue where we'd misjudged something. We'd aimed to start earlier on the morning, so we could get away earlier on the night, but it didn't happen. We couldn't get into the waters of the lake any earlier, but I'd forgotten that in my mind. And as we started the run that night, I'd figured out how many hours I needed to finish in before the cut-off time, if you like, for Ironman. And it wasn't until about 20k through the run that someone mentioned, oh, you didn't start as early as you wanted to. You've only got an hour and a half to finish. And all of a sudden, just absolute blind panic kicked in. And it was pitch black and blind. It was like, obviously the fatigue and the tiredness added to this. Blind panic kicked in. All nutrition went to the side. All kick choices went to the side. And I just started running through the dark with someone in front of me with a head torch saying, just don't stop, just keep going, just keep going, just keep going. And the knock-on effect there of getting tighter and tighter and tighter and not eating properly because I was just trying to beat this clock and there was just no way I wasn't going to finish within time. That was a big psychological issue for me. But again, it just would not let it. There's no way. People say to me, "Don't worry, no one will mind if you finish it 10 minutes late, 15 minutes late that night. Nobody will know, no one will mind." But that just wasn't good enough. Wasn't good enough. It was going to be done in time, in keeping with Ironman rules. If it killed me, and that the last sort of 15k of that run almost did. The physio tells me on the night after I'd finished that I was completely away with the fairies. I don't remember the physio. I don't remember the rub down. I was told that we moved around to a different building and I had to get a cold shower and blah blah blah. I have no recollection of it. I was told I was speaking like as if I was drunk and the fatigue, lack of nutrition. But what I do take from that is I didn't waver. Whatever it was, however psychologically affected and tired I was, I didn't waver in my mind. There was still something there that would not allow me to buckle and go, all right, yeah, it's okay. I'll have a rest now and go and do another 20k, 15k. I didn't. Something deeper than that wouldn't allow me to stop. And I'd pushed myself that night to the point where I was almost sleep running. And then I managed to get changed, get on a physio bed, get a shower, get into a car, travel another 100 mile further south, do all of that pretty much with no recollection of any of it. So why is that? Why was I still able to dig that deep and do that? Surely that week I should just be stopping. I don't know. Which takes us up to the final day, which I'll tell you what the final day, because it was a whole different kettle of fish psychologically. It absolutely all changed on that final day. Probably because we travelled overnight and I only got about 2 hours sleep between Ironman 7 and Ironman 6 and Ironman 7. So I'll tell you a little bit about that in the next video.